do-it-yourself NeuroELT, making your textbook more brain-friendly. As Joanne said, last June we did a 2-day conference, mini-conference here in Sendai about neuroscience and English language teaching. And I thought it was very useful, but afterwards Curtis Kelly, one of the other presenters, and I said, yeah, that was good, but what about, as Joanne said, Monday morning? How do we take these ideas and translate them into something practical in the classroom? And I was especially thinking about textbooks. Because most of us use a textbook or some kind of printed material, and whoever wrote that was probably thinking about grammar and vocabulary. And if you were lucky, they were also thinking about tasks and motivation and language function. And what I'm pretty sure whoever wrote your textbook was not thinking about was brain science. Because that's not something that English textbook writers usually think about. For two reasons. When you're writing a book, you're just so busy. It's like juggling ferrets. I mean, there's so much to keep track of. But the whole area, mind, brain, and education, is just very, very new. And so it's not something that most of us think about day to day. But it's something we should. Mind, brain, and education is the label that Harvard uses for it, and it's catching on. And what we're talking about here, mind refers to the cognitive part, the thinking process. Brain is more about the plumbing and the circuitry. It's the physical brain. And then education, how do we create a nexus of all three of these aspects? And that's what I want to look at today. And to do that, to make this real, I'd like you to do, you need to do part of the work. I'd like you to think of a specific class, okay? And I don't just mean, okay, my Thursday conversation class. I mean a class, perhaps a specific class you taught last week. And thinking, what were the activities? What was the grammar? What was the vocabulary load? What was I trying to teach? Maybe something you taught last week. Better yet, something you're going to teach next week. Because what we'll do as we go through this session is I'll introduce some brain keys, some principles we can use in our classroom. And I'd like you to think, how can I take Mark's idea and put it into my own class? So can you think of something specific? Yeah, specific class. And when you have an idea, when you know the class, can you turn to the person next to you and just tell them a little bit about it? What's the class? What's the level? What's the activities? What's the language purpose? About a minute or so to do that. Okay, guys, you haven't had enough time to describe it, but that's okay, because just because you have started to, I know you have a class in mind. And that's the important part. And so as we go through, please kind of keep a running thing in your mind. How am I going to think about that class specifically? The materials, your textbook, whatever else. Think about the students, their interests, and how you're going to plug these ideas in. Now, in preparing this session, not just preparing this session, but what I've been doing for the past several years as my interest in this area has grown, I've been doing a lot of reading, and you come across certain ideas that just stick in your mind, which is appropriate for a session on neuroscience, things that stick in your mind. And one that occurred to me is a quote from a Brit, actually, who said, you know, I used to think the brain was the most important, most wonderful organ in my body. And then I realized he was telling me this. And, well, yeah, the brain is telling us that. The brain is telling us everything. But it is that important. More important quote, maybe, is from Herbert Simon. Simon was at Carnegie Mellon. He is one of the founders of cognitive science, Nobel laureate, won the Nobel Prize for his work. And Simon said, learning results from what the student thinks and, learning results from what the student does and thinks, and only from what the student does and thinks. Yeah? Cognitive science, brain science, is everything we do impacts it. Which means this is something we have to look at. We have to be thinking about as teachers. And Past 10, 15 years, there's been a huge amount of research, huge amount of science, and a huge amount of interest in neuroscience. And I think it's really important with what we do that we make sure it's about the science. Because there's some great science, and there's also some non-science, there's also some nonsense. Go on the internet, you'll find tons of garbage in addition to useful stuff. So what I'm going to do to try to base everything I'm saying in the science, I'm going to tell you the science as we go through. So when you see this logo, that's a brain bite. That's going to be a little bit of science behind what I'm talking about. That logo means what's the science. And I bring this up because I mentioned junk science. I mentioned things you've heard. How many of you have heard we only use 10% of our brain? Yeah, you've heard that? Garbage. No, it's total garbage. Because the thing is, two things happen. Any part of the brain is dynamic. The brain is changing and being active all the time. Any part of your brain you don't use is either reassigned. If you've heard of plasticity, that's what that's about. The brain's plastic. It changes. Or the neurons shrivel up. Because we say neurons that fire together, wire together. The brain connections that we're using, neurons are just brain cells. The brain connections that we're using get stronger, and other things that die, shrivel up, okay? So if we were only using 10% of our brains, so that is nonsense, okay? And I told you, I'm going to tell you the sources here. You can find this a lot of places, but Patricia Wolf's book, Brain Matters, which, by the way, is a great resource if you're interested in brain science in the classroom. Another thing you hear, have you heard this? The brain is kind of like a sponge, and it absorbs far more than we're even aware of. Yeah? Garbage. The brain is much more like a sieve. Yeah? And stuff goes through it. And we instantly forget about we discard, we don't even notice, 99% of our sensory input. Now think about that. We're teachers. We want the students to get what we want them to get. And we want it to not be part of that 99%. So this is one reason we ought to pay attention. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do in this session is introduce some brain keys. And brain keys are essentially rules. They're takeaway things. But the term brain rules has already been taken by a guy named John Medina, who wrote a great book called that. So I couldn't use that. So I thought, okay, brain keys. So I need brain, I need a key, and I need a logo. So I put them together. And it looked like a gun, which I didn't like at all. So we'll use this. This logo means brain keys. And when I put this up, it means this is something that you can walk away with. And the pencils are coming out. And I just need to tell you, everything, the important things I'm going to say are on the handout. And this PowerPoint is on my website, which you can download if you want to use parts of it with your students. Or if you want to write stuff down, because that's how you remember it, great, but you don't have to. And speaking of the website, dictation. I like dictation. Dictation is a great way to get short bits of information to students, and in this case, to teachers. So I would like to dictate an address, and I'd like you to write it. And the address is tinyurl, tinyurl.com/NeuroELT, NeuroELT. Okay?
That's Mark's website.
That is a page of my website that is specifically about NeuroELT. Okay? So tinyurl.com/NeuroELT. Because I've given you a bunch of handouts. There are a bunch more brain rules specific, brain key specific handouts on the website. And before we get into the main thing, a word of caution. I've only got a bit over an hour. I cannot tell you everything there is to know about modifying your textbook. Nobody can. The field is changing so fast. I'm not going to try to tell you everything. I'm going to try to share 7 ideas, actually 7, 8, or 9, depending on how you slice them. 7 ideas that we know are true, and that you can apply to most textbooks, most classrooms, at most levels. okay? Now, one of the things we know is the brain looks for patterns. So let me cue you into what the pattern of this presentation is going to be. For each section, I'll give you a brain key, a generalizable rule, and I'll give you a bit of science, the brain bite, and then I'll give you textbook examples. And Pearson is sponsoring the meeting today, so I'm taking examples from English firsthand, but that's not the point. The point is the do-it-yourself part. Whatever you're using, I will show you ways I've tried to incorporate, John and I have tried to incorporate these ideas into our books, but the point is, how can you use these ideas with your books? And how many of you are teaching the Monka Show approved textbooks? A few, yeah. Maybe especially for you guys, because not only are those books not brain friendly, in many cases they're close to brain dead. And, but there are ways we can modify them. And so, 7 important ideas. Number 1, go for emotion. Go for emotion in the classroom. And most of your books don't have much emotion, right? Not emotional content. They're beyond, well, I hope you have a nice day. That's about as deep as it gets. The publishers do not like emotion because it's emotional. Yeah, seriously, and you never know where it's going to go. And I've heard things from publishers like, yeah, but what if somebody, and those what ifs end up with this blandness that happens. We need emotion. The brain needs emotion. Emotions trigger dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical. It's a neurotransmitter. Our brains are like a chemical soup of neurotransmitters. And you hear about dopamine and endorphin and serotonin and oxytocin. Those are the good ones. You also have the cortisol. You got the bad ones. Not bad, they're negative. Anyway, dopamine, among other things, controls motivation. You could not get out of bed in the morning without dopamine. You could not walk across the room, The old joke, why does a chicken cross the road? We know, dopamine. That's it, that's the motivation. Dopamine impacts focus, it impacts memory, and it impacts motivation. Yeah? And think, you're a teacher. Isn't this like 90% of what we do? Sean Aker in the Happiness Advantage describes the neurons, the brain cells, as learning centers. He said dopamine is what gears up, ratchets up the learning centers. This is how learning goes on, and we need emotion to do that. Now, as I said, most of our books don't have it. Here are a couple examples of ways to put emotion into a textbook. This is some, John and I wrote a special time, and the students are drawing a picture of some time in their life. We say, a time, draw a picture of something you learned. You learned how to ride a bicycle. You learned how to swim. You learned what a broken heart felt like. Some good news or some bad news. A place you visited, someone you met, a time you felt very happy, very sad, a time you grew up. We're giving them a lot of examples that can lend themselves to emotion. Here's another thing. It's a past tense activity, and we ask them, choose some of these topics that you want to talk about. So a special gift you received, that's probably a good one. The first time you spoke English. Can I ask you guys to think of the first time you spoke English if you're Japanese, Japanese if you're foreigner. And you probably remember it. I added this one to the book because of my wife's experience. My wife's Japanese. Her first experience with English was junior high school 1. And when the teacher said, Masumi, next sentence, they were reading from the book, and she read, I have a friend. His name is Mike. Because if you're a 13-year-old Japanese, that's how it ought to be pronounced, right? So her first experience with English was making a mistake in front of all her friends. A scar. How many of you have a scar? And how many of you, your scar has an interesting story, right? Yeah, I added this because I had a student, this is more than 10 years ago, but I remember very clearly, Natsumi, and she had this great dimple, and that was her charm point. Turns out it wasn't a dimple. The day she graduated from junior high school, their class had given a clock to the school, and the kids were fooling around It was a big clock, outdoor one. She fell down on the base, ripped her face open, blood everywhere, and it healed into this beautiful dimple. And it was a fascinating thing that looked like a fascinating story. Textbook conversations. Hey, what's up? Nothing really. You look so down. Yeah, I just got an email from my boyfriend. What did he say? He wants to break up. The boyfriend's breaking up by email. What a jerk. John and I had a thing called drama coach. Play with the language as you're practicing. How do you feel? Sad, happy, sympathetic, etc. Close your book, have a conversation in English only. Talk about a happy experience or a sad experience. You can add those negatives. I wouldn't require students to talk about a sad story, but I give them the choice. Here's another example. They're changing the verb to the past. Time you are very happy, were very happy. Are in a game or contest, you were in it. And they choose the ones they want to talk about. And here it's just a check 6. But frankly, what I think we should do, what I often do on choice items, about half of you said you were working college and universities. And when you do research, we often use a Likert scale, right? A 1 to 5 or a 1 to 7 scale. And I never know, like 1, is 1 the best? Because that's number 1? But like 5 is bigger than 1, so it's 5. So I think, speaking as an academic, that we should replace the Likert scale with the more universally comprehensible Smiley scale, because everybody understands it, right? And so I have the students go through and choose a questions you like. And so, made someone happy, that's good. And you don't like, took a long trip, I don't want to talk about that. Go to a wedding funeral, that's just so. Did something stupid, that's fun to talk about. Students rate the questions. And I've mentioned this idea for years and never seen anybody take it seriously. Until I was in Indonesia a couple of months ago, going through Jakarta Airport, which is famously bad. I mean, it takes forever to get through. But when you finally get through immigration, they invite you to rate, give feedback to the immigration officer, and this is how they do it. They're using the Smiley scale, which I think is brilliant. But anyway, those are some of the ways that John and I have tried to incorporate adding emotion to the class. How can you do it in your class? Well, number 1, skip or change boring tasks. And teachers sometimes, I can't skip it. It's required. I have to teach it. Look, if it's boring, they're not going to learn it anyway. Leave it out and replace it with something worthwhile. Okay? Have students rate tasks. Students love to evaluate. So like, guys, come here, I'm going to hand out a little piece of paper. This task we did today, that was new. Give me your feedback. And it makes students part of the process. It gets them more involved. Look for chances to add emotion. Did you notice on that very first thing, the draw a picture thing, it only said a time you learned something. That's emotionally neutral. I was the one who said, you learned to ride a bicycle, you learned what a broken heart felt like. We can add emotion to activities. And the easiest way in the world, especially those of you who are in junior high and senior high and using the approved textbooks, turn it into a game. And the easiest game is John Can. And students already know it. And so I teach my students how to do it in English, just to add English to it. But for example, this page is from Horizons, and the students have just read a story. And what normally happens, read the story, answer the questions. And you could do it that way. Or you could say, read the story in pairs, look at the questions, John Can, rock, scissors, paper for the right to answer the question, and partner, now you have to check, okay, A wins, A answers number 1, B, check A's answer, was he or she correct? So they're both reading, they're both answering all the questions, but they think they're playing a game, and it adds an emotional bit. Step 2, choices. Learners need choices. The brain needs choices. And here's what's interesting. It's not the choices themselves. It's the perception of having choice that makes a difference. You know, you could set it up as a teacher. 90% of the students choose the one you would prefer they choose. Nothing wrong with that if they're making the choice. Okay? It's the perception of choice that stimulates the brain. Now here's where it gets messy. They need choice, but not too many. Because we can hold roughly 7 pieces of information, plus or minus 2, in working memory. The working memory is almost the same as what used to be called short-term memory. But the point is, we can't remember everything, which is why when you go into Starbucks and you see like 4 panels of 20 choices each, you order the same thing you had last time. Right? No, just because there's too much, we can't hold that all in memory. So we need choice, but not too many choices. So here's some examples. This is a Unit 1 thing where cave art. Students are drawing a picture of their lives. And yeah, you can draw anything you want, but how about your family, your interests, where you live, things you've done? We give them like 5 choices. They can do other things if they want, but it's finite. Here, you're talking about your life, picking up 5, this is the soundtrack of your life, 5 scenes from your life. Draw a little picture, and what's the song that goes with it? They're making a movie of your life. So instead of everything, 5 items, 1 song each. My experiences. Okay. Now here, it looks like I'm breaking my own rule, right? There are 12 choices there. That's too many. Try it. You're talking about this. Look at the answers. Last weekend, the person you know, the mistake you made. So you're not actually making 12 choices. You're looking at each one. Last weekend, yes, maybe, no. A nice person I know, yes, maybe, no. You're doing a whole series of small choices. So, give students a choice. How? And this is one of the most important, one of the easiest things to do in the classroom. Give them the choice of tasks. Now, I'm not saying everything needs to be a choice. And I'm giving you 7 brain keys. You don't need to do all of these all the time. We need to do them. But, so for example, I use a lot of pair work. And everybody does the pair work, and everybody's doing the same pair work. But it's pair work, so they take different amounts of time, naturally. And so while they're doing that, I write on the board, finished choice. Do the pair work again with a new partner and change parts. If you were A, now you're B. So they're task recycling, but it's a new partner, so there's new information. Or I'll take a new activity. Most teachers' manuals or websites have a lot of extra activities. I'll photocopy those. Do choice 1. Or if you want to do a new activity, it's here, come and get a copy. Or free conversation in English. Talk about X. And X is somehow related to whatever the topic they've been doing, so we're recycling the language, we're recycling the vocabulary and grammar functions, but given them their choice, they decide what they want to do. Do it yourself. Choice of how to do it. They know what the task is, alone or with a partner. Stand up, find a new partner. I had a great experience on last Friday. I did this with the class. I set up the activity. It was a group work. And I said, okay, 3 choices. The easiest way is do it like it's in the book. The most challenging way is, and I gave them a modified instruction, and then 1 in the middle. And almost the whole class went for the challenge yourself, which of course delighted me as a teacher. But the whole point is they were doing it. I mean, will students choose to do the most difficult one? Yeah, if it's their choice. If I said, I want you to do the most difficult one, that's imposed and probably not. So choice can make a difference. Finally, listening. How many of you, after a listening task, you've done it a couple times, they found the answer, do you play the CD one more time just so they can confirm? But I've had a lot of teachers do. I know I do. Students like it. Give them the choice. Watch, I'm going to play it again, watch me, I'll point to the key words as we hear them. By the last time I've probably written all the answers on the board, right? Or, watch your book as we listen, touch the words, touch the pictures. Or, close your eyes, watch the movie in your mind. So students are essentially choosing their own level, but it's a way to give them choice. Finally, the brain likes novelty, the brain needs novelty. The point is, we do not pay attention to boring things. We can't pay attention to boring things. So, you're teaching the future. You're going to will future. You could say, write 10 sentences about your future. Or you could teach them poem reading, which is going to get them more interested. We're describing people. I could say, describe your partner. Or I could say, spy catcher. You're James Bond, or you're a Bond girl, whichever you want to be. You're describing people for that reason. How to do something. Tell somebody how to operate a machine, or teach them an origami they don't know, and then have them teach a partner. Or can, ability. There's always like, can you play tennis? Can you ride a bicycle, etc. How about if we actually challenge them? Can you name 8 countries in Africa with your partner? Go. Who's first? 8 countries in Africa. Mali's on everybody's mind.
Cape Verde.
Chad.
South Africa.
Burkina Faso.
Raise your hand when you get 8. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. I'll tell you, you never know what's going to happen. I did this just a few weeks ago with a class. And you know how you have some people who are really dangerously Genki? You know, and they shout out their answers, and the first one was Venezuela. I'm like, so it doesn't guarantee accuracy, but it can be. Another, can I ask you to stand up? That was not in my department, by the way, different department. Okay, can you say the alphabet A to Z in 5 seconds? Go. Sit down when you finish. 5 seconds. Okay, you did it. Challenging them, actually having them prove they can do stuff, gets them involved. It's novelty. The problem, though, with novelty is anything is novel once. And maybe the second time. And by about the third time, it's not, no matter how cool it is, it's not novel anymore. My rule of thumb is, for starters, do something each class that is not from the book. And I'm a textbook guy. I write textbooks. I believe in them. But do something that's from out of the book. Check your teacher's manual or your website. There are usually extra activities. And frankly, sometimes the activities in the teacher's manual, John, you can confirm this, I think, some things that are a little too edgy. And by edgy, I mean weird. Sometimes some things the publisher will let you put in the textbook, even though they're really, really interesting activities, those go into the teacher's manual. Yeah, they're often great activities. Check out resource books. Do you know the communication game series from, what's her name? Jill Hatfield. Jill Hatfield. I use this because there are about 10 or 12 in this series. Elementary, beginning, intermediate, advanced. There's the vocabulary series, the grammar, bunch of great photocopiable activities, easy to use. Both Cambridge and Oxford have great series. I mentioned this book from Cambridge, Memory Activities for Language Learning, because this is very brain-oriented. And there's a Hebling series, not as well known. This is maybe the most creative of these handbook series. Cambridge, they're by the publisher, Swiss publisher called Hebling. In Japan, they're available through Cambridge and through ABEX. So worth checking out. There are a lot. You don't have to write all the activities yourself. There are a lot of good activities out there for you. Novelty. Please go to my website. This is why I gave you the URL. There are a couple of handouts. One's called One Size Fits All. 11 activities adaptable to nearly any level or topic. So these are activity frames. You just plug in the language target you want. There's another one called One More Time with Feeling, bringing task recycling into the classroom. Ways to have students use the same bit of language several times. It's fluency work. Harumi Sensei talked about task recycling at the expo, and it's a really, really useful technique. Anyway, go to my website. These two handouts together give you 16 activities. If you teach at university, you have 15-week semesters. So you have lots of activities for you. You don't have to invent them all yourself. Now, let's go back to your specific class. Yes?
Sorry, about the teacher manuals, are the next approved textbooks, are those teacher manuals available for public purchase? Because I've asked my teachers before and they said they were not. The High Friends, New Horizons, that's
I've ordered them. Hiroshi Ota is one of the authors of Columbus, which is the from Mitsumoto Tosho. Unfortunately, it's not used in Miyagi Prefecture. It is the junior high book that has the highest teacher satisfaction rating in Japan. What about things like ordering teachers' manuals? How do you?
I guess each school has the teacher's manual. I mean, the Horizon. Your school uses Horizon. Horizon has a lot of teacher's manual and useful activities.
Yeah.
But I can't buy one for myself.
Have you,
You can. Of course. But, oh.
go to a books. I've not ordered the teacher's manual, but I've ordered the textbooks by just going to a bookstore and saying, I want to buy junior high Horizons.
Yeah,
Right.
probably the teacher manual that got the answers in.
That may be the
So
problem.
if all the junior high school kid goes to Mara's then, I'll have a teacher's manual. Suddenly the
Actually,
test
no.
score goes up.
I'm sorry, I do have a
I
good
think
solution
that's
for you. The ALT, there are a few websites where ALTs share activities to go with basically every unit of Horizons, Crown, all of the big series, and you can get lots of activities that way.
Okay.
Okay. I've got URLs. If you can't find them, email me. You've got my email on the handout, and I can send you that. But good point. Okay. Now, can I ask you to turn to the person next to you, go back to that class, and what you're going to do? If it's next week, what are you going to do? If it's last week, what could you have done, or are you going to do 51 weeks from now, to add emotion, or to add choice, or to add novelty? 2 or 3 minutes.
That was the fun part.
Okay.
Oh, that's nice. So they'll do games like that on cards, like you get points for matches, and then
Okay.
a box card.
Lots of discussion. By the way, son, can I ask you to just share your idea? We were just talking about, Charles, your situation.
You could ask your Japanese partner, I mean the teacher of Japanese, of English, to buy some materials that publish.
The supplementary material. You probably the teacher's manual's in Nihongo anyway, right? But they have supplemental materials, which is probably what you want. Austin?
Also, Charles, have you been in contact with Jeff or Ian at the Board of Education?
They're the Sendai ones.
Okay.
So Cameron or Luke, or Cameron's gone. Luke.
Well, you might want to
This would be a good
be
source.
in contact with one of them because I know it is possible to get teachers' manuals. It's a special order. I've done it before to my Board of Education. I'm not a jet, but it's possible. So
Okay,
you
good.
might be able to.
So thanks to both of you guys for sharing that. Anything else anybody wants to share before we go on? Anything you came up with that was like, wow, I gotta try this? No? Okay, next point. Teach, I've got a lot of stuff here, so if people have things, please throw them out, but we gotta keep moving. Teach across the senses. And remember that early slide about the brain's like a sieve, not like a sponge, where she was saying we discard 99% of the sensory input. Sensory input is how we get everything into our brains. We need to pay attention to the senses. Everybody, barring a handicap, has the 5 senses: sight, auditory, haptic. Some people call it tactile. Actually, tactile, or some people call it kinesthetic. Actually, kinesthetic is movement, tactile is touch. Tactile plus kinesthetic. Kinesthetic is haptic, unless you're British, in which case it's all kinesthetic. But it's one of those British American English things that we treat differently. Olfactory, smell, gustatory, taste. They're all very, very powerful. Those last 2, though, are not as flexible in the classroom. But the first 3, visual, auditory, and haptic, we ought to be using in every class. Multisensory input. In clinical studies, when some groups get just auditory, some get just visual, some get just haptic, all groups with multisensory input have greater recall on tasks. Yeah, and this is from Brain Rules, which is another very good book to get started with. Problem solving. Groups that get multisensory input are 50 to 75% more creative. It makes sense because you're getting input. It's kind of like, I'm going to show how old I am here. You remember the movie Rashomon? No. Great Japanese film about this, where you see the same story from several different points of view, and it's a different story. And that's what's happening when we get multisensory input. We're seeing the same story, the same input, in different ways. One easy example that you're all familiar with is Find Someone Who. And I really believe Find Someone Who is one of those activities that works at pretty much any level, any class, any topic. And why? Well, in many ways, it's the perfect multisensory activity because it's visual. You're looking at, you have some questions that somebody has to answer, the partners have to answer, and you have to look at your partners. You have to listen to their answer and listen to their question and understand their answers, and you're moving around. You're having a whole series of partners. So that's multi-sensory input. Dialogues, conversations. One of the reasons we had a drama coach is get the students up and moving. So, gesture each time you speak. Use your hands, arms, head, shoulders. Don't do that affectless, hello, what's my name, kind of thing. Have them play with it. Increases the sensory use. And I talked about task recycling. One great way is, in this case, tell me about your family. You're talking about your family, and Kyle's my first partner, so we talk for 2 or 3 minutes, and I listen to his story, and then I change. Nerek's my next partner, and I say the same thing. I'm working on my own fluency, but moving and interacting. Look for ways like that to add movement. And pronunciation is one way. We don't think pronunciation. People think pronunciation is auditory, right? That's only part of it. I want to try a quick thing. How do you do pronunciation? Who does listen and repeat? Yeah, most people. I mean, that's everybody's. Students think that's pronunciation, right? And it is part. But I want to show you something interesting. Can you listen and repeat? Where did you go?
Where did you go?
I went to China.
I went to China.
Who did you go with?
Who did you go with?
I went with a friend.
I went with a friend.
Now let's do listen and don't repeat. Or actually, listen and repeat silently. So your mouth is moving. You're saying it, just no sound, okay? Like, where did you go? I went to China. Who did you go with? I went with a friend. When did you notice pronunciation? The first time when it was out loud, it was just blah, 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 blah. Get the noise out there. Second time, you were slowing down to actually notice the haptic activity. You were noticing physically what was going on. Yeah. Another thing that I think I learned this from John. Did I? I think.
I've adapted this one since.
Good.
Not like that clown.
I'll teach it and then you teach it. How it works is you plug your ears while you're actually speaking. So, for example, where did you go? Where did you go? I went to China. I went to China. Can you try this? Where did you go?
Where did you go?
I went to China.
I went to China.
Who did you go with?
Who did you go with?
I went with a friend.
I went with a friend.
You know how, like, when your voice is recorded, it always doesn't sound like you? It's the same thing. It's just changing the acoustics, and you notice. John, what's your variation?
It was just when they put their fingers in their ear, they ooh. Some fingers were messy, so especially with children. If you do this with children,
I thought you were talking about Abuka.
So actually, if you do this, it's much easier. The students, especially young ladies of about 18 or 19, feel much more comfortable doing this than doing this type of.
Not if you present it right. Okay, great idea. Thanks for sharing that. Anyway. One other, I love this. This is a quick and easy one. Body clocks. Can I ask you very quickly, write down 4 times. What time did you get up today? What time did you go to bed last night? What time did you get up yesterday? And what time, and this is especially good for our sleep-deprived students, what time do you wish you could get up every day? Okay? And now, body clocks. I love this activity because it has one of the weirdest instructions I ever give. You are a clock. Can I ask you to stand up work with a partner, pantomime your times. Partner, guess.
Okay, you're a one-man show. Alright. What time do you go to bed?
Come on, don't be shy, Jim. Come on. Oh, Mark, we've got somebody with an injury.
I've never had that problem. Okay, you can use one arm and one leg. No, how about you can just guess Jim's pantomime? I've never thought of that. That's a good point. Okay, great. Have a seat. Good idea.
It's hard to like reverse it.
Great time.
I always get on like when it's not like.
Excuse me. Great. One issue that came up that I consciously did not deal with is, is the mirror, And I never bother explaining it, because if I do this, and this is 9 o'clock for you, right? And I think it's 3 o'clock, but you guess up. I very quickly figure it out. It's easier to just let them figure it out, or in your case, physically move the partner's arms, which is great because you're dealing physical. Well, also, it's oxytocin, the cuddle chemical. No, we weren't physical. We were not killing. But no, oxytocin is the hormone that's released. It's the hugging hormone, cuddle chemical. Whenever you have physical contact with somebody, you get oxytocin, so it's another benefit. Anyway, but one of the reasons I did this activity is to raise the question, how long do you have your students sit in class? And in most cases, if you're in high school and you're teaching 45 or 50-minute classes, in most classes it's 45 or 50 minutes. And if you're in university and teaching 80 or 90-minute classes, it's 80 or 90 minutes. And you see, the reason that that's a problem is when you sit for 20 minutes, blood flows south. You get the color's bad. You get a blood buildup in the feet, lower legs, and butt. Yeah? And it's coming down. Now, when students are standing up and moving around for just 1 minute, you get a 15% increase of blood and therefore oxygen to the brain. Wow. Yeah? That's one reason you get sleepy. It's not because the class is boring. It's just like, you're losing oxygen. We need to move around. So, here's another good book, David Seuss's How the Brain Learns. Look for chances to have the students stand. If you're doing dialogue practice, stand up, face your partner, gesturing's easier, and you're moving. Find a partner. Instead of pairing with the person next to him, stand up, find somebody on the other side of the room. Stand up, find somebody who's wearing, well, it doesn't, in high school they're all wearing the same colors, but find someone whose name has the same number of letters in Romaji. Find a new partner. Drills a short speaking task. This was a kind of drill, wasn't it? The time thing. Have them stand up. The thing about multisensory stuff that's so important, when you get mainly oral input, think how many classes are that? You have something like a 10% retention rate. were mainly visual input, because all the senses are important, but visual kind of trumps everything. You get like a 30% recall. That's 3 times as much. But when you combine oral and visual, it's about 65%. 6 times as important. People remember more, and memory is important. So add the senses. Now, your textbook probably, I shouldn't say probably, your textbook has visual, because textbooks are visual, and probably has auditory. Most books now come with a CD, and if nothing else, you're the teacher, you're talking. They're getting visual input, they're getting auditory input, but the problem is, so often in classes like, oh, you're very visual, you're always watching, that's good. And visual learners get praised, and auditory learners are listening carefully and they get praised, and haptic learners are moving around and they get punished. Look for ways to add touch, add movement to the class. Please go to my website. There's an article I wrote for English Teaching Professional where I took the kinds of things we do as teachers, as English teachers, listening, speaking, and speaking ranging from controlled stuff like dialogues and drills through more open stuff like pair work, through very open stuff like discussion, and I run it through visual, auditory, haptic, tactile, kinesthetic, and give you ways to add it to your book when it's missing. You can download that from my website. Next one, the brain needs a challenge. Yeah? And here's something that's interesting. First of all, think about the idea of challenge. Because sometimes I hear teachers say, oh, my students aren't motivated, I can't challenge them. And I would say, man, if your students are not motivated, you've got to challenge them. It's the only way we're going to get through. What happens when activities are too easy?
They get bored.
They get bored. How many, a lot of foreigners here, why is that? Where are you from? How long have you been in Japan? How do you think about Japanese women? That conversation you've had 4 million times, why is that so frustrating? Because there's no interest there. It's so boring, right? And what happens if a task is too difficult? You give up. So here's one of the ironies, or it's not ironic, but useful thing. Work that interests students will necessarily be at the appropriate challenge level. Yeah? So fine, if they're interested in it, you got the level right. Now, how do we play with levels? How do we add a challenge? I like starting lessons out with like a picture dictionary kind of activity. A lot of vocabulary front loading. I'm reminding them of the vocabulary that they, A, that they know, but B, that they're also going to need for this. And then I'll say, now, look at each group. Add 2 more words for each group. Build on what they know. Maybe they already know it in English, especially in Japanese. So much gairaigo is from English. But maybe they don't know it. Maybe they need to look it up. Fine. Because they're looking up things they want to add to the list. So that's a way to add a challenge. The language box. Every textbook has some kind of language model, right? A grammar box or a language model or key sentences. And something that John and I do, which I think is useful, is don't give them the whole box. Give them enough and let them figure it out. So what's that first one? I blank a store called Island Village. I-L blank blank blank. Like or
Love.
yeah, you don't know if it's like or love. You put them, don't make them all too easy. In this case, it happens to be love, but students guess, and then they see if they're correct. Island Village, blank is it?
Where?
Yeah, that was pretty easy. It's in the mall.
See?
It's fashionable and cheap. Fashionable and cheap, really. I bought this shirt, skirt.
Bra.
It starts with an S. Bra spelled backwards. The point is, you can make mistakes, and that's fine. It's not a test, it's a game.
Mark,
Uh-huh.
a joke name, Shimamura.
Exactly. And that was, who caught the joke? Did you hear what Jim just said? What's the name of the store? Island Village. Shimamura. Right? Humor is very good too, except sarcasm. Sarcasm is bad for brain learning because students can't, they don't process it correctly. But humor is excellent in the classroom. Anyway, challenge. Get yourself one of those whiteout pens, whiteout markers, copy it out, take your textbook, block out some of the words, even if they're all there, and have the students do it from the handout, or just put it on the whiteboard, on the chalkboard. And have students add extra vocabulary. On my website, there's a handout called Fluency and Accuracy, Choose Your Level. And fluency, we're defining here, is basically fluency is when you're using, you already know the language, you're working on ease of use. Okay? And this gives you ways, vocabulary activities, to work on fluency, to make it easier so they can focus on that, or to work on accuracy. So here's a way to adjust level. Can we, I'm going to have to very quickly, go back to that specific class. A minute or two, what you're going to do to increase the sensory activity, make sure there's some visual, auditory, haptic. And what are you going to do to add challenge? 1 or 2 minutes, go.
I guess you already have the senses too. Do you have one?
Worried about. So let's go ahead and do the last section, and then if we have time we can do more discussion. Anything you want to share?
I have a quick question. I'm sorry. Do you consider writing a haptic activity?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one reason. For example, how many, I look around the room and I see many people are taking notes, even though I said everything's in the handout, everything's in the, the PowerPoint's on the website. But a lot of us, how many of you come to a session like this, take notes, and never look at them again? Yeah? And it's guilty laughter. Don't be guilty. You are doing it because that's how many of us input. We write it down because that makes it easier for us to remember, and that's haptic activity. Thanks for bringing that up. Excuse me. Let learners create. Yeah. Sir Ken Robinson. And have you seen the Sir Ken Robinson's thing on TED.com?
Yep.
It's the TED.com that's been most viewed.
Was that the
Creativity.
creativity and
Yeah.
it was amazing.
He's amazing. Yeah. He's a creativity expert. And he says, creativity is the process of having original ideas that have value. Yeah? He tells a great story. It's an elementary school story that this little girl who's coloring a picture, and the teacher comes by and says, what are you drawing? And she said, God. And the teacher says, well, that's kind of silly, isn't it? Nobody knows what God looks like. They will in a minute. because kids are creative. And I've always found it interesting because in Japan, primary school, there's all the group work and the hancho and all that kind of stuff. And then we get to junior high, and then we get to junior high, don't we? Creative intelligence. The ability to see how to do things or think about something in multiple ways. That's what, it's similar to multisensory, isn't it? Looking at things, understanding things in different ways. And I came across a great bit from Tyson, no, what's his name? The scientist. Neil deGrasse Tyson. Do you know Neil deGrasse Tyson? He's probably America's most famous scientist right now. And came across this great bit.
Plus, kids are born curious. They're always exploring. We spend the first year of their lives teaching them how to walk and talk. And the rest of their lives tell them to shut up and sit down.
And that's a sad indictment of education, but it happens a lot. Let learners create. And, I mentioned the primary school thing. A very simple idea. Keep in mind, I teach university. I get the students markers and colored paper and scissors and colored pencils. And all of this stuff that would be natural in any primary classroom, I have them in my university. I have a toy box in my classroom. And we have all this stuff for our part-time. I'm encouraging those of you teaching university, because part-timers have it really tough because they don't have all this extra stuff. We not only got all this stuff for our part-timers to use as well, we went to just go and got some of those baskets, you know, they sell them for like 200 yen, 250 yen. We have all these baskets that say, English teachers carry lots of stuff, and it makes it easier to take stuff to class. Get equipment so students can create. Mind maps. Mind maps are wonderful. And many of you know mind mapping, I assume. When I was first introduced to it, I was skeptical because I was taught mind mapping as a way of note-taking. Once I understood mind mapping as a way of note-making, it's wonderful, it's very powerful. And if you use mind maps, great. If you don't, go to my website, there's a section on mind mapping and suggestions ways to implement it. So, in the classroom, as I said, I think students can do more than write answers. Have them draw pictures, have them make mind maps, have them do any kind of maps. Storytelling. There was a clown, but he wasn't funny. He made me feel, and the students go, so many people don't like clowns. It's really easy. Einstein said creativity is intelligence having fun. He also said play is the highest form of research. So I want to put this on my research grant next year. Okay, creativity, how do we do it? Get art supplies. It just makes it easier. Thank God for 100 yen shops, right? There are just so many things you have them do more than just write. Have them do mind maps. Have them do drama, not in the sense of we're going to do a play. We might do that. But just play with drama. Go to my website. There's some action cards, voice variations, physical variations for when they're doing dialogues, just ways to introduce little drama, little creativity. And creativity brings up the issue of praise, and I know John's going to talk about this later, but what I think is a really important point on praise is praise effort, not ability, not intelligence. With what they found, this is based on Carol Dweck at Stanford. She's done some really important work. If students are praised for effort, 90% chose more challenging tasks. Right, this is clinical studies. They're doing these card things. You're praised for, wow, you're really working hard. You're really pushing yourself there. Students go for more challenging tasks. If you're praised for ability, you want to keep the praise so you quit taking risks. Yeah, they don't want to make mistakes, so they go for less challenging. They avoid challenging tasks. Next one, personalize, or I mean, today's session is being supported by Pearson, so they prefer I spell it this way, but personalize the classroom. Personal experience increases memory. Yeah? So, we're doing dialogues, now 3-minute conversation test. Close your book, have a conversation, English only. Talk about your schedule, which was the topic. Always take the conversation. Hi, Tim? No. I thought you were giving me a time. 3 seconds left? Here's a schedule. Any listening activity has a topic and therefore can be personalized. And listening is kind of like usually CIA English. It's listening into somebody else's conversation, right? I like to do it as about you. You take the same topic and ask 4, 5, 6 questions about that topic, but the students answer about themselves. So here they were talking about schedules. So, okay, what time do you get up? What time do you get on weekends? What do you do before breakfast? Answer the same questions, and then they can compare it. It personalizes the listening. Personalize, add personal information to pair and group work. Most books have this, very often not enough, but once you have the basic structure, it's easy to add more. Add an about you to listening. Take dialogues to the next step. What's the next scene? What happens after this? Close your books, talk about the topic. You know, they've done it, they've done the practice work, that's the accuracy work in the book. Now close your book, talk about the topic, but use your own ideas and information. It becomes fluency. Now if we had time, which we don't, we talk about that specific class, but please think about how you're going to add creativity, how you're going to personalize it. One more thing, one of the things that we know is repetition is important for memory, especially spaced repetition. Listen and repeat might be important for some things, but doesn't help with memory. Spaced repetition, review an hour later, 2 hours later the next day, or in this case, something that we learned between now and an hour ago. With your partner, what do these 7 pictures mean? Alright, let's check.
If it was this.
What's this?
Emotion.
Emotion.
Joy. Novelty. Senses. Challenge. Creativity.
Personalized. Personalized. Okay, now, the do-it-yourself part. All of these ideas, I showed you ways they have been put in textbooks with the idea that these are things, nothing was particularly difficult. These are things you can do in your class. In the words of Saint Nike.
Just do it.
Exactly, just do it. So, the promise, and I'm going to ask you to make a promise, not to me, because I'm not going to see you until next month or maybe whenever. Promise to yourself. This week, try one idea each day. I'm not saying you should do all 7 in every class. You can't. That's not realistic. Choose one idea each day and try it and see what happens. And I always use the baseball rule on new ideas. Try everything 3 times. First time, I don't expect it's going to work very well. Second time, it's usually better. Third time, if it doesn't work, 3 strikes and I'm out. I'll throw it out. But yeah. But if you try these ideas, it means by definition you're going to introduce novelty into your class. Because this is not just about the students. This is also about keeping you interested, keeping you excited. And once you do novelty, it means you're going to have more choices. And once you do that, challenge and creativity are going to come along, and probably the senses and personalization, and it's going to end up with more emotion, and that is good for brain learning. I want to thank Pearson for sponsoring this. The activities came from these books, which you can look at over here. Also, Curtis Kelly and I wrote this handout together. Curtis, who some of you know from Brain Days, he's been to Sendai Job a few times. He's the author of Significant Scribbles for Pearson, also from Writing from Within, which is a heavy emotion in writing, and Active Skills from Cengage. And so this is Curtis at a barbecue in Sendai. The chicken only fueled the conversation. Thank you all very much.